selection of pieces from Béla Bartók series entitled For Children. For Children, together with Bartók's 44 violin duos, the 153 pieces of his piano series entitled Microcosmos, as well as his 27 choruses for equal voices, are generally considered as Bartók's contribution to the modern aspirations of Hungarian music pedagogy, mainly associated with the name of Zoltán Kodály. These short pieces in the 4 volumes for children beautifully demonstrate how the artistic values of great works can be transformed into a more limited, we should say, framework in musical sound and form. Exactly because of these compositions, we should say, can serve well as a pathway to the better understanding of Béla Bartók's compositional style. Here is what he says. Although my original works outnumber my transcriptions and have, I trust, a greater importance, I nevertheless by no means consider my transcriptions as a negligible part of my output. Bartók himself professed on many occasions that he held the folk song to be a perfect miniature work of art, which is unsophisticated in its simplicity, but possesses peculiar melodic and rhythmic features. Folk song settings have an important part in Bartók's output. From the 93 mature works in László Somfai's catalogue, 51 are or at least contain a few folk song settings. They spread over 40 years, 4 decades. In other words, they are present from the very beginning of Bartók's career to the very end of his career. In regards to folk song arrangements, Bartók says the following. Melodies in such an archaic style can very well be provided with the most daring harmonies. It is an amazing phenomenon that the archaic features will admit a much wider range of possibilities in harmonizing and treating melodies or themes of the pentatonic kind than would be the case with the common major and minor scale melodies. Composers surround these motifs with the results of their working, their imagination, and thus create, so to speak, an original and individual work. Bartók's discovery of the folk music of Hungary goes back as far as 1905, the beginning of the 20th century, when he basically, according to Otto Gombosi, found himself at the dead end. What was the situation of a young Hungarian composer at the beginning of the century, in an era when higher musical education was fully based on German music and exponents of the late Romanticism were in charge of educating the younger generation? This is the question that Otto Gombosi formulates in his article on Bartók, the young composer. According to him, Bartók had the choice either of one, submerging in the Brahmsian tradition that was brought to Hungary by the German composition professors at the Liszt Ferenc Academy of Music. But this seems to be a solution for temperaments and talents of a passive nature. The other possibility, according to Gombosi, is the tinkering with moderately modern experiments in a vacuum, a field for aesthetic artisans, he says. Or finally, of giving in to the empty chauvinism of a pseudo-Hungarian music, which Gombosi considers the refuge of minor spirits. Bartók had looked into the first and second of these alternatives during his apprentice years and saw their futility. The last possibility could not be avoided, as there was a wave of liberal nationalism in the country, and to create music in this spirit was a great temptation for Bartók and his contemporaries. Franz Liszt's Hungarian style was the most noteworthy model for composers of the time. The symphonic poem entitled Kossuth, inspired by the Hungarian politician, governor-president of the Kingdom of Hungary during the Revolution of 1848, Lajos Kossuth is imbued with Hungarian color, using elements of Liszt style. Only the funeral march of this opus has ever been published. Let's just listen to a short excerpt from this piece that will demonstrate how this national style created by Liszt in the 19th century had a profound effect on the early compositions of Bartók. We heard Bartók's Kossuth Symphony, or an excerpt from Kossuth Symphony, in a piano transcription. Probably Liszt's Hungarian rhapsodies echo in your ears, hearing the special scale, la ti do re mi fa si la si fa mi re do ti la, this gypsy minor scale, and also the dotted patterns, which is so characteristic of 17th and 19th century Hungarian art music. The impulses towards a new departure, which turned out to be probably the deepest musical inspiration that Bartók ever gained, came from Hungarian folk music and from the folk music that he got acquainted and he collected and analyzed, systematized. The Hungarian folk music at that time, in the beginning of the 20th century, was almost a buried treasures of Eastern Europe. You had to travel to the fringe areas of Hungary to find this repertory, as it was the living inheritance of the peasantry. This music was totally unknown in the Hungarian cities. We are talking about Hungarian, Slovakian, Romanian folk songs that were mutually interdependent, influencing each other, as these nations, these peoples lived in the Carpathian basin or beyond the Carpathian mountains, but there was constantly an interaction, including musical interactions. Bartók's connection with folk music was twofold: scientific and creative. On the scientific side, there was the collecting of the folk song, transcribing the folk songs from the recordings they made, the classifying of the folk songs, and the creative side, there was the great opportunity of expressing himself through a new musical language that was fertilized by traditional music. New idioms appeared in his music that were fundamentally different from idioms of Western music. Bartók found new material which was rich of new rhythmic and melodic constructions, the new melodic qualities that deviated from the harmonically preconceived world of major and minor keys. Bartók started to explore various possibilities of the newly discovered material in regards to tonal concepts, in regards to new ways of harmonization, in regards to polyphonic treatment of the music. In regards to the influence of peasant music on modern music, Bartók says the following: the right type of peasant music is most varied and perfect in its forms. Its expressive power is amazing, and at the same time, it is void of all sentimentality and superfluous ornaments. It is simple, sometimes primitive, but never silly. It is the ideal starting point for a musical renaissance, he says, and a composer in search of new ways cannot be led by a better master than the folk song. In what forms exactly did peasant music influence Bartók's compositions? In order to give an answer to this question, I wish to refer again to Bartók's own ideas expressed in his essay entitled The Influence of Peasant Music on Modern Music, which comes from 1931. According to Bartók, a folk melody can possibly be incorporated unaltered or with slight variations with additional accompaniment or for opening and closing phrases, which can be merely ornamental or of primary importance. For Bartók, it made no difference whether the composer invented his own themes or borrowed material. He stated that the composer has a right to use material from all sources. What he has judged suitable for this purpose has become through the very use of his mental property. But the highest form of folk-influenced composition is, according to Bartók, that in which the folk atmosphere has been completely assimilated. He says, neither peasant music nor imitations of peasant melodies can be found in this kind of music, but it is pervaded by the atmosphere of peasant music. In this case, we may say that he, the composer, has completely absorbed the idiom of peasant music, which has become his musical mother tongue. Bartók left behind over 300 folk song arrangements. Bartók's primary type of arrangement followed either the lead style model for voice and piano, for voice with piano accompaniment. Compositions belonging to this category were mainly conceived in the early decades of his career. However, this type of genre culminates in the 20 Hungarian folk songs, which is a later work from the end of the 1920s. The next group is arrangements for choirs. The earliest examples are the 4 Old Hungarian folk songs, and the 4 Hungarian folk songs for mixed choir represent the fully developed phase of this genre. That latter cycle comes from the 1930s. The first arrangement of instrumental folk music, were the 3 Hungarian folk songs from Csík County. These compositions are simplicity itself. The tunes appear in their most pure form, and we sort of feel that Bartók is afraid that with too much accompaniment, he may spoil the natural beauty of these instrumental pieces. Etc. The last category of folk song arrangements are the series of compositions written for pedagogical purposes. In this category, we can enlist the 44 duos for 2 violins, where not all of the folk songs are original folk melodies, but the majority of them. But this is the category where for children also belongs to. And some movements from the Microcosmos series, of course. John Weissman, in his writing on Bartók's piano music from the late 40s, points or actually cites Bartók, who in connection to the writing of these pieces, he said the following. Already at the very beginning of my career as a composer, I had the idea of writing some easy works for piano students. This idea originated in my experience as a piano teacher. I had always the feeling that the available material, especially for beginners, has no real musical value, with the exception of a very few works. For instance, Bach's easiest pieces and Schumann's Jugendalbum. I saw these works to be insufficient, and so more than 30 years ago, I myself tried to write some easy piano pieces. At that time, the best thing to do would be to use folk songs. Folk melodies in general have great musical value, so at least the thematical value would be secured. I wrote them in order to acquaint the piano-playing children with the simple and non-romantic beauties of folk music. Excepting this purpose, there is no special plan in this work. Gyermekeknek, or for children, from 1908 and 1909, included 85 pieces based on Hungarian and Slovakian folk tunes, respectively. And these volumes were revised and published again in 1945, this time containing 79 pieces. So actually 40 years later, Bartók returned to this material. This shows how highly he thought of them, how important he thought these are. The inspiration of Bartók, the composer, and the stimulus of Bartók, the pianist, is enriched by the experiences of Bartók, the teacher, the composer, the performer, and the teacher. Bartók went to great lengths to bring together songs of different social functions, different musical types, collected from various regions by himself and others, to form within the framework of a pedagogical method, a comprehensive monument of the nation's folk songs. Furthermore, he undertook to teach these songs to Hungarian and to Slovak children as national songs, not just piano pieces. Bartók printed the words of both Hungarian and the Slovak songs, at least one verse, in some cases more than one verse, at the back of each volume for children, so that the piano students could learn them to sing as they learned them to play. In this citation above, Bartók gives reference to Schumann's Jugendalbum, which is dated from 1848. This was one of the 3 works, along with Kinderszenen and Schumann's writing entitled The House and Life Rules for musicians. And in these 3 works, Schumann also challenged the pedagogical philosophy of his day. Through the pieces of the album for the young, Schumann also asserted that music simple enough to suit the performing abilities and, of course, the imagination of the children could still be music of great value. In his description of For Children in 1940, Bartók also wrote that some of the melodies have even an international character. This can probably be observed in the very first number of For Children. This song, we should say, lacks any markers of being a Hungarian song. I find it extremely interesting that for the first song, Bartók chooses really something that doesn't sound Hungarian, not even to our ears, although I know this song with text. But I think this is very symbolic. If we compare, on the left side, you see Bartók's music that we have just, it's not that piece, but on the left side, you see Bartók work, and on the right side, you see Schumann's work. If you, for example, compare the idioms in the left hand, you see that it's very similar, the idiom that he uses. And also, it's interesting that Bartók changed the Hungarian melody, adding a repetition, so it will have exactly the same form as Schumann's work. The method and the sources of the pieces in For Children are based on the folk songs themselves. Many of these melodies are modal or pentatonic. The tunes always keep their original shapes. Bartók does not alter the tunes, and the arrangements merely unfold the implied harmonies from the tunes, and the accompaniment is built around the melodic and rhythmic possibilities of the songs themselves. The accompaniment is always very discreet, and the form of the arrangements also follow the form of the songs. A stanza of the folk song is the basic unit, which can be repeated once or twice in slightly altered arrangement, providing the possibilities of binary or for ternary patterns. There can be a short episode inserted between the stanzas. There could be introduction and the postlude of a different size attached to the stanzas. Intended for elementary education, the pianistic writing is also simple, yet the diverse technical problems of piano playing, including touch, fingering, phrasing, dynamics, are consistently dealt with. There are a lot of markings in the score in reference to dynamics, articulation, touch, etc. Bartók derived the nature of these arrangements from the text of the songs. The text of the songs and this is why it's so important that it can be read at the end of the volumes, determine the overall atmosphere of these short pieces. Bartók even makes a musical cycle of 3 songs that dealing with the death and heartache, marking the 3 of these to be played without a break. In case of songs with some narrative, he dramatizes the story with strong changes within the setting for the different stanzas, etc., etc. So the text for the songs are very important in order to understand the atmosphere and the emotions of the music. All the arrangements, from the simplest to the more complex ones, are connected by the same respect as we have read for the simple and non-romantic beauties of the melodies. His pedagogical folk song arrangements, in fact, make the best possible preparation for the performance of more virtuosic piano compositions based on folk songs. And here I would like to show the beginning of improvisations, Opus 20, the work where he reached, according to Bartók's own words, I quote, the extreme limit in adding most daring accompaniments to simple folk tunes. What a striking difference between the 3 folk songs from Cheek County, the earlier piece, and this highly complex approach to folk song arrangements. All right, well, let's look at those few pieces that we have agreed on showing approach to teaching them. I follow very much the same model as during previous sessions. I deconstruct the music and discuss aspects of the music including the melodic rhythmic features, structure, key structure, polyphony, in order to show the musical content very clearly, which can lead us toward making plans for the teaching these teachings. All right, number 15 from the first volume, Allegro Moderato. Let's start with the melody, the structure and key structure, where I should repeat what I already said. The melody itself really defines everything major in these arrangements. Here we have a major melody that I wrote out in two-sharp key signature. In the first edition, Bartók didn't use key signatures. He wrote accidentals in front of each single note, a technique that he does a lot in his other compositions. So instead of key signatures, accidentals used next to the pitches, which doesn't mean that everything that without a key signature is not tonal, but this is just a technique he uses. Do, 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 fa, mi, re. Shall we sing together? 1, 2. Do, 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 fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do. So, 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 do, te, la, fa, mi, fa, so, la, so. So, 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 do, te, la, fa, mi, fa, so, la, so. Do, 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 fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do. So, 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 do, te, la, fa, mi, fa, so, la, so. Do, 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 fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do. The rhythmic motion of the song really defines the phrase structure. Ti-ti-ta, ti-ti-ta, ti-ti-ti-ti-ta-ta. Throughout the piece, we have this 4-measure pattern repeated altogether 6 times. The second phrase is repeating the first phrase exactly 5 notes higher when we look at the opening. Do, 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 fa, mi, re is repeated. So, 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 do, te, la. Now the ending does not keep this 5th changing structure. So, do, ti, do has fa, mi, fa, so in the responding place. Ti, do, fa, so. We can see the 5th change there. Re, do. And at the end, we have again 5th changing structure. La, so, re, do, la, so. So with a slight variation, we can identify this 5th changing structure, which is characteristic of the new style of Hungarian folk songs. This second phrase is repeated, and then phrase A comes back. The whole thing has this arch-like form, starting in the tonic. We could say repeated a 5th higher, like we would be in the dominant key, repeated again, and then coming back to the tonic key. Let's listen to the relationship of the melody and its accompaniment. I created a recording in which you will hear the melody and you will hear the rhythm of the accompaniment on a percussion instrument. The reason I did it because the accompaniment has a strongly percussive quality that alternates with harmonic accompaniment added to the melody. most of the time we hear this percussive accompaniment, and occasionally the rhythmic accompaniment is replaced by a more harmonious accompaniment. Listen to the recording, and then it will be made clear for you. Yeah. Now I will play it again, and I'm asking you to follow the percussive accompaniment to the melody and tap along. When you hear the harmony added to the melody, please touch your upper body like that and draw your arm across your upper body to show the smoothness that contrasts with the more percussive quality of the accompaniment. Here we go.
László, we can't see the score.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. Was it related to the presentation, the comment? No.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry about that. We couldn't see the score.
Oh, you don't have to see the score. I'm just playing a recording that shows the different aspects of the accompaniment to the tune. I would like you to respond to what you hear. When there is a percussive accompaniment, we tap or we clap our hands together according to the rhythm. And when we hear the more harmonious, clearly a very lyric addition to the melody, then we make this gesture across our upper body. Yeah, and my aim is that the children really absorb these two qualities. This is how I would teach them. I would make them listen and absorb these contrasting qualities in the accompaniment. All right. It can be practiced several times, and the aim is that when I sing the song, the children will be able to play, clap, or tap the accompaniment. They will remember. They have memorized. They absorbed these two qualities in the accompaniment. Can we try? I sing the song, you do the accompaniment. 1, 2. Do, 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 fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do, so, so, do, te, la, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, so. Now the change, so, do, te, la, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, so. Percussive, do, fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, change, so, do, ti, la, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, so, do, fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do. Excellent. Good. In relationship to the harmonic content of the piece, I created this slide to show very clearly the formula that closes the phrases 3 times throughout the composition. And as a way to teach this, we can ask students to simply play these closing formulas. Ta 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 ta, so do ti do. They play the closing formula. Then so do te la fa mi fa. So again they play. So do te la fa mi fa. So they play again. Do, fa, mi, re, measure 16. So, do, te, la, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, so. Do, fa, mi, re, so, do, cadence, pom, pom. Yes, so they will understand the structure of the music. They will feel the ending formula, the dominant going to the tonic, and they will feel that at the end of the second phrase and at the end of the third phrase, the closing does not happen, although we hear chord progression, but this is not as strong ending as the tonic and dominant main step in measure 4, measure 16 at the very end. So this is what I marked closing, and then the second cadence is more opening, as it ends the first inversion of the tonic triad. At the end of the first system, we have the dominant chord in the third inversion, fa, so, ti, re, ti, so, fa. And then this is repeated halfway through the second system also. So highlighting these harmony ideas are important in the learning process. We gave the framework of the music to the students. But it is also important to say, and I am going to stop here a little, because for Bartók and also for Kodály, it was important to, in the beginning of their career, to create arrangements of the folk songs that contain some familiar harmonies, to enjoy the music of the peasants for the audiences in the beginning of the 20th century was a great challenge. Monophonic folk songs showed striking differences to the harmonically based, often over-harmonized polyphonic Western music. Monophony was, of course, a major discovery for Bartók and Kodály, the significance of which was further enriched by the abundance and unique character of the scales and the rhythmic diversity. The freshly discovered musical world was a great revelation, but it would not be that attractive if the harmonic implications of this music had been similar to those of Western music. I think partly Bartók and Kodály got attracted to this because it was very different. Yeah. However, they both were aware of the musical taste of the period. And accordingly, they knew that to popularize their discovery and impress wider audiences, or even the trained musicians, they had to dress, so to say, the folk melodies in Western style musical clothing. This was not the case in later folk song arrangements, as we heard, for example, in improvisations. Bartók did not try to make it appealing. But in this in this time of his life, he was very concerned about creating an appealing accompaniment to these pieces. So if we analyze in detail, then we see tonal harmonization. I'm not going to analyze chord by chord. I just want to show that if you analyze it, you will be able to identify the most basic chords of Western tonal music. The only thing I wish to show you is how he uses the subdominant chords, which you will understand a little later why I emphasize at this time. These are all the subdominant chords he adds to the melody. If you have a keyboard around you, you can play these chords as I'm singing the melody, so you get the impression of the harmonic world. Do, 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 fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do, so, so, so. Another fa, la, do, subdominant chord, fa, mi, fa, so, la, so, 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 so. Another subdominant chord, do, ti, la, fa, mi, fa, so, la, so. In the second system, we have a re, fa, la, do. Now a seventh chord, do, 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 a seventh chord colored with the B flat, fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do, so, 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 do, ti, la, fa, mi, fa, so, la, so, do, 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 again a chord colored with the B flat, fa, mi, re, so, do, ti, do, re, do. It can be also a way to help students memorize the harmonic content of the music, highlighting just one particular chord family, the subdominant chords, and show the different inversions and the different colorings of these chords. Vera Lampert, great Bartók scholar, in her article, Notation and Performance in Bartók's Folk Song Settings for the Piano and His Vocal Music, points out how meticulous Bartók was about showing articulation marks when presenting a vocal folk melody. If you look at this score on this slide, you can observe this variety of articulatory marks. The staccati followed by the tenuto marks, and the staccato followed by the slurred ace notes, etc. Each combination of articulation marks carry the power to convey a certain mood, as it is proved by some multi-stanza settings where the melody is presented with different performing marks in each stanza. This is pointed out by Vera Lampert, and she adds that the result is a more dramatic, or the result is the difference between more dramatic and more lyrical effect in the arrangements, creating a certain narrative which is similar to the storyline of the poem. So these have to be observed very carefully when performing. Tenuto marks are never accents. It simply means that the note has to be held long. Do, 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 fa, mi, re, so, do. It has to be held for the exact length as marked by the rhythm. This is not accentuation. For the endings, portato markings are used in these songs. Of course, these markings have relationship to the language of the songs as well, to a certain extent. One of the chief characteristics of the Hungarian language, and I'm sure you can hear on my accent, and we share this characteristic with Slovak and Czech languages, namely that we stress always the first syllable of the word. Yes, which has important consequence on the performing of these pieces and arrangements also. All arrangements will start on a downbeat. There will not be an acclusis in these arrangements, and it simply comes from the language. So you may want to remember this. Each not each, sorry. As I have said in the beginning, Bartók revised these pieces in the 1940s. So most of the pieces exist in two versions. Sometimes the differences are not that enormous. Sometimes only the expression markings are different, which is the case with number 15. Exactly the same notes are used, but as you will see now, we will hear the first edition, the music according to the first edition, and then we will hear the revised edition. And the difference lies only in the markings, tempo markings, most importantly. Here it comes. And the revised version sounds like this. Something is wrong with the... All right. I chose recordings by two of Hungary's foremost pianists, Dezső Ránki and Zoltán Kocsis. Dezső Ránki plays the earlier version of these pieces. Zoltán Kocsis always plays the revised versions of these pieces. Number 8 from the first volume.
Oh,
yes,
can you write the names of those pianists in the chat?
Yes, of course.
Köszönöm.
Yes. Number 8 from the first volume has this melody, minor type of melody. Again, you see the slurs and the staccati and the tenuto markings and the portato markings that have to be taken very seriously. Do, ti, ti, la, la, la. Do, ti, ti, la, ti, do, re, mi, mi, re, do, ti, la, la, do, re, mi, mi, re, do, ti, la, la. In the case of bourdon instruments like the bagpipe, the hurdy-gurdy, and the zither, the nature of the instrument itself provides the possibilities of harmonization. The influences of these instruments are significant, appearing many times in the works of Bartók and Kodály. They imitate the sound of the bourdon instruments, mainly through the repeated notes, repeated chords in the accompaniment. Ethnomusicological research, however, primarily determines the use of chords within instrumental folk music based on the string bands. So when we hear tonal harmony and tonal chords, that usually imitates the string bands playing instrumental Hungarian music. But when we hear the repeated harmonies and the drone of sound, that usually comes as an idea to imitate either the bagpipe, the hurdy-gurdy, or the zither. The accompaniment to number 8 is based on this idea. You see the repeated pitches, la, 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 ti, ti. Within these repetitions, we can also identify some harmonic relationships. La, so, in measure 4 goes up to the do, tonic goes to the dominant. We can identify the tonal relations. If you have a keyboard around you, then I suggest that you play this accompaniment in a slow tempo. I sing the melody. 1, 2. Do, do, ti, ti, la, la, la. Do, do, ti, ti, la, ti. Do, re, mi, mi, re, do, ti, la, la. And after this harmonious accompaniment that I analyzed here to show you again the tonal harmonies, Bartók uses imitation. Yes, he breaks this monotony of harmonization by adding the imitation at the end of the at the last 4 measures. Further interesting ideas can be noticed how he fills the perfect 5th interval, which sounds like a drone underneath the melody. He harmonizes and writes changing notes. Do, re, do, do, do. Do, re, do, re. When you teach it to children, this can be practiced so that children play the middle, they sing the middle note in the harmonies, so they can really feel the changes of the coloring. Singing middle lines in harmony corresponds beautifully what Schumann said to his piano students, and enlisted in the house and life rules for musicians, that if you want to be a good musician, you should sing middle voices. So this is something we can do here as well. Encourage students to sing one note in the harmony, which can be the middle note. Bartók says, "You have probably noticed that I lay great emphasis on the work of technical development, that I do not like to repeat a musical thought identically, and I never bring back a single detail as it was the first time. This treatment seems from my inclination toward the variation and transformation of themes. when Bartók stays the second stanza of the music, he changes the rhythm of the accompaniment, but also changes the coloring of the harmonization by leaving out the B flat in measure 6. He creates a Dorian harmonization instead of the la ti do re mi fa mi re do ti la. He creates la ti do re mi fi so fi mi re do ti la, Dorian coloring. He makes the tonal music more modal at this point. Yes, very simple, very subtle the differences are, but significant. In verse 3, again, tonal harmonization, but with different inversions of chords. And the ending is different also. And of course, there is the continuation of this melody, which is harmonized with a harmonic ostinato, as you see in both verses. And finally, we should point out this Adagio, which is a cadential formula he uses at the end of the stanzas, creating a plagal cadence, moving again away from the tonality. Instead of a 5-1 type of cadence, he creates a 4-1, more modal cadence that fits beautifully with his idea of changing the harmonization to a Dorian in the second verse. Almost begging at the end, which is corresponding with this traditional song, which is indeed about begging. Number 8 from the second volume, or second book, or which is actually the third volume, is a Slovakian tune that has very much the same kind of bourdon type harmonization. Imagine that in folk bands, occasionally they hit the strings with the, now what is it? Bow. With the bow, you hit the strings that creates this percussive accompaniment to the music. Now, this is imitated in this space that you are going to hear.
Sorry, László, I just missed the
Yes?
the piece we just had. Was that from For Children Volume 1?
Correct. Yes. And now comes number 8 from Volume 2.
That's why I was confused.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just want to let our Canadian friends know that this piece is in the level 4 book.
Yeah.
So late elementary level.
I wrote out the harmonization of the piece, which is again very clearly tonal. It can be practiced so that we play the harmonies for the students, and they sing one note from each harmony following the teacher hand sign. Let me demonstrate. Simply reading from hand signs, easy melodic turns, and embed it to the harmonic world of the composition will help students to hear the harmonies that they are playing. So the harmony is not a technical element in the music, but it's actually a sensation, an oral sensation. Number 34, Andante. It's very interesting that there is a major revision of this piece in regards to the notation, to a certain extent also to the harmonization, but the notation in the early version is fundamentally different from the notation in the revised version. In the early notation, in the earlier version, Bartók notates the music in 2/4 time, and in the later notation, he notates it in 4/4 time, which gives, to my taste, a very different character to the music. If I deconstruct the rhythmic progression of the piece to a more basic element, then I would get a simple tit 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 ta tit 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 ta formula. This rhythm is very familiar for Hungarians from the so-called swineherd dances, a rhythmic formula that exists also in Ruthenian music or Romanian music, or also Polish, Slovakian repertoire. We can identify folk music with the tit-tit-tit-tit-tit-ta rhythm. Can I suggest that we sing these melodies to the tit-tit-tit-tit-tit-ta, la 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 mi re, mi la mi do mi re la, mi re do mi re la, so so do re la la la. A clearly pentatonic music. We have had major, minor music. Now we hear a pentatonic music. Can you sing with me to the tit 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 ta? La 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 mi re, mi la mi do mi re la, mi re do mi re la, so so do re la la la. Now, if I add the ending formulas to this rhythm, we see that each little two-measure long phrase ends with rhythm ta. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Repeat with me. Tit, tit, rhythm ta. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. One more time. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Let's sing according to this rhythm. And la 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 mi la mi do mi re la mi re do mi re la so do re la la la. For a non-Hungarian pianist, this rhythm is very odd. And because this rhythm comes from our language again. The first syllable of the word is accented, plus it's also short. La, so, do, re, la, la, la. Non-Hungarians, when they hear music with this rhythm, they say, oh, yes, this is it. It refers to a formula in folk dancing which requires the hitting of the ankles together. Yes, when the men are wearing their boots in dancing, they hit their ankles together to this rhythm ta formula. That is very, very characteristic of Hungarian dance music. Let's recite the rhythm according to what you see on the slides. Here we go. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Tim, rhythm ta. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. I say the rhythm, and please sing the melody according to that rhythm progression. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. La, 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 mi, re. My turn. Tim, rhythm, rhythm ta. Your turn. Mi, la, mi, do, mi, re. My turn. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Sing. Mi, re, do, mi, re, la. My turn. Tit, 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 rhythm ta. Your turn. So, do, re, la, la, la. I strongly suggest that you don't let the students play this melody on the piano until they are able to sing it correctly. Yes, it will be so much easier, and it will save you from so much frustration. This is a difficult rhythm for non-Hungarian students to perform correctly. They have to feel in their body this rhythm. This can also be done with a lot of movement and maybe just movement to the steady beat while singing this, so they feel this rhythmic quality of the music. Here, and of course, you will get this these slides. You will be able to work out the harmonic content. Now, the reason I showed you so many subdominant chords earlier, in this arrangement, not a single dominant chord. All the harmonies are built around the tonic and the subdominant. Subdominant chords resolve to the tonic, bringing this archaic type of sound to the music. Starts in F minor. Of course, this is the study score I created. I deconstructed the harmonic content of the music to show it very clearly and very purely what is the harmonic content. Clearly, he uses a lot of chromatic harmonies. I would like to point out, especially at the end, the F flat, A flat, and D natural harmony, which all of you in college learned as the augmented sixth chord. So la, lu, do, fi, do, lu chord appears. Do, 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 lu, do, fi, do, lu. And la, mi, di, la at the end. The second verse is very interesting because the melody still goes in the F La pentatonic, but the harmonization is in D minor, sort of D minor, and then goes to F minor. There is a certain feeling of tension when the melody is in F La pentatonic scale and the harmonization happens in D minor. It's almost like a bitonal feeling. Let's see the right hand of the piano accompaniment. First we have F, E, then F, B flat, F, C, F, D. A technique that Bartók uses a lot. This is what we call projection technique. It's when we are zooming out or zooming in, yes, when we are focusing, yeah. So this is a positive projection. We are enlarging the intervals, starting from the third, going to the sixth, then starting with the second interval and opening to a perfect fifth interval. At the end of the composition, he adds a very melancholic type of coda, and now the D minor of the previous verse is shifted down to the D flat minor tonality. If we really think, D flat minor has 8 flats in the key signature. So it's a very distant relationship from the opening F flat, F minor tonality, -4/5 into the negative direction, gives a certain melancholy, bitterness, sadness to this essentially dance music. This is how it appears in the first edition. And in the revised edition, we hear it in 4/4 time. Harmonies are slightly different also. And for the ending, let me just refer to another pentatonic melody, which is the most peculiar of pentatonic melodies. This is the only mi pentatonic melody that I know. I know a lot of do, la, so, re pentatonic melodies. This is the only one I know that is mi pentatonic. The first phrase has 3 pitches and goes as follows. La, 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 la. Mi, mi, do, mi, mi, re. Second phrase has the same pitch set also. Mi, mi, do, re, re, do. Mi, mi, do, re, re, do. Then, do, do, la, do, mi, re. Do, do, la, do, mi, re. And then, mi, do, la, 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 mi. And it ends on a mi. A very unique melody, also within the Hungarian repertory. Now the arrangement, the 2 arrangements are strikingly different. In the first edition, Bartók uses 3/8 throughout the composition. You will get the analysis of the music, but to conclude, I would like to show the revised version, which is notated in alternating meter, 3/8 and 2/8 alternates. I have a feeling, but I may be wrong, that Bartók didn't believe in 1908 that children can play something in alternating meter. But I might be totally wrong. He may have known a different version of this song, as he was a great scholar. But clearly, in the 1940s, he had a strong belief that this is something that children can do. And this is very important aspect of his style, changing meter, most intricate metric, the most intricate succession of different meters characterizes so much of his music. Well, I think this was it for today. I hope I could give you some ideas about these pieces that you can convert into approaching other pieces from this marvelous collection.
Do we have any questions from our participants? Yes, Lorna.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here in British Columbia, Canada. It's nice to see those attending. I have a question about the second to last selection we were looking at, the number 32 from volume 1. And what I was here, I'm wondering, was I hearing correctly that when we have this strongly syncopated eighth note to dotted quarter note, it was actually a little bit quicker than if we metrically divided up the beat into even eighth notes. I noticed even as we got into the thinking measure, let's see, I have to count it out, 4, 8, 9, 10, measure 9, 10, 11, and so on, where we have pairs, lots of pairs of eighth notes. They're actually a little bit pressed together. You know, the first one a little bit shorter than the second. Was I hearing that correctly?
I think you were hearing it correctly. This is why it's nice to hear a Hungarian pianist. Not that other pianists cannot do it well, but the Hungarian pianists have one advantage: they know the text. Yeah. And so when you sing it with text, it would be a performance tradition to sing the first eighth note in the dotted or syncopated pattern shorter. Fehér fúzói kavérán. So that is how it would be sung. It's a practice that you can slightly make the eighth note dotted quarter pattern maybe a 16th and a double dotted quarter. So that's a performance practice, which is right for this type of music.
Yeah, I found it very interesting to listen to, and it just added something, a very lovely different rhythmic quality to what otherwise just looks like pairs of equal eighth notes.
Correct, correct. Great observation. This is happening in this performance.
I have a question about this Bartók. At the end of Bartók's music, we often see an indication of how much time it should take to perform the piece. How literal does he mean?
Very, very literal. Of course, there are people say that his metronome didn't work perfectly, but he was very particular about metronome markings and timing of his music. As a choral musician, I perform many of his works for equal voice choirs. And there he gives very odd timings, like 31 seconds. Yes, and so that's 30 seconds and 35, 31 seconds. Yes, he's very particular about metronome markings. He uses odd metronome markings, not just even. When you have a metronome, there are always even numbers. But he uses odd numbers in his metronome markings as well. So we take them quite literally. We don't do this with all composers. So from my own practice, I know that Kodály, for example, treated his metronome markings and tempo markings quite liberally. So if he heard a good performance, he agreed. But Bartók was different. He was extremely precise. The same precision what he managed to achieve when transcribing the Hungarian songs. He had to slow down the recording so that he could write out all the ornamentations which we might not be able to notice when we listen to a recording. But when you slow down, all the grace notes, all the ornamentation can be written out. And he took it he made a lot of effort to make this extremely precise, so that his transcriptions of folk songs are not approximately, this is how approximately it is sung. This is how it is sung. And do we sing it the same way? Of course not. But when you document something, there was this scholarly precision in his approach.
Fantastic. And I think Lily and I recognized Heshpava in the last melody.
We sang it in the choir, right? As far as
Correct.
yeah. I do have a question as well. So with these procedures like forms and harmony, do we use it before we introduce the song to students, or after the student has mastered the notes and everything, and then we go through those analyze, or we just go like section by section and then we do these things? What do you recommend when we teach piano?
I don't think that there is one recipe that works for every situation, but I tend to suggest that with certain aspects of the music, we work away from the instrument. So let's try to help students to absorb the material orally and come to an understanding through listening, or by playing simplified versions of the harmonies, or clapping out the rhythm of the songs, or helping them to understand the structure of the piece by drawing them a form, analytical chart of the form. So visual and oral stimuli can come before the technical realization of the compositions. But I don't suggest that we follow one particular rigid idea, but I think the technical work will be much more successful, or I should say smoother, if students have a better understanding what they have to do.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Great. I just have one sort of concluding thought, and we're really open to the audience giving feedback on this. We have invited already Latsi to return in September, October, to talk about more advanced Bartók repertoire. So basically, for those of us in the Canadian system, we were using books 3, 4, 5, 6 today. But as we are aware, Bartók wrote for much more sophisticated language. And I'm wondering if there is interest in going to like upper intermediate, upper advanced repertoire, or early advanced. I'm getting a nod from Lorna. I have a big smile from Natalia. Yes, Lorna.
Yeah, my first exposure to Bartók was probably about 50 years ago, when I learned his Evening in the Country, which is considered one of the upper ones. And it was my first introduction to music of this nature, and it just resonated so easily with what my ear tended to lean towards. So while that may have been somewhat unique for me compared to other students, it was so approachable. And I would love to hear more about some of the more advanced work for sure.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what we would love to do is maybe do a shorter piece from level 7 or 8. And then maybe, let's see, we could focus on a major work, like a major movement of the sonatina, and really go in depth, because I know from your course on the 44 duos for 2 violins that there's some really in-depth harmony we could look at and performance practice. So this has been great, and I hope one day we can all be learning together in Hungary, and that after we can have a tanzhaz, an evening of dancing, and that we can hear this music in its context in Hungary and enjoy some delicious golyóslevest before or after.
Great. The prophet should speak from you.
All right. Well, I would like to say köszönöm szépen, kedves Laci. We are so grateful Thank you so much. And I know that I'm inspired to pick more Bartók repertoire for my students. And the great thing is that children that age, they love it.
Mhm.
It's
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. It was an honor. Have a lovely day.